Okay, I think everybody's on because there's 11, so I'm going to get started. Now, last week I did some of these. I don't know if any of you saw them in oil. And this week I'm going to be doing some quick sketches in pastel, but I work somewhat smaller. So one additional thing I think about is I kind of design to the space a little differently than when I'm just doing the oil. But as far as the beginning of how I start a figure, that doesn't change. And so just turn that a little bit. So I'm choosing to do this figure first. I like her movement. So I always do start, I might cut off some of the top to fit because I don't like to do it too small. But I follow through first on her movement. And I always like to have a little bit of the head going first and then follow through on her movement, which is she's got a high hip. I know last week I talked about the fact that if you see a bent leg, which you do see here because of her knee, the leg that has the weight on it has to also have the higher hip. That's a given. And I keep it really simple first. Kind of, I don't like this one. I'm going to use an actual. If I make a mistake, I make a mistake. This is a compressed charcoal. The other was a vine charcoal. Okay, so now I'm going to start with this kind of movement, but I might make her a little bit. Yeah, everybody should be muted. Is everybody can see this? If you're muted, then nobody else will take the screen. And the next thing I look at is what is the angle of her shoulders? Okay, and they are somewhat angled like that. This will probably get completely readjusted as I work because I'm going to have a little more of the top of her and a little less of the bottom. And I like the angle of the hat. Now the hat here, if there's a hat, it has to line up with her, with the sides of her face. If it's, you don't line it up with the brim, but with the actual where the hat actually comes onto the head. And I'm just going to put her in shadow a little bit because we're going to be thinking about where we're going to put the values. Let's see. These are actually fairly straight. Oh, I have to redo her completely once I get that. The nice thing is pastel will cover anything I don't like it to do. Have this arm come down. And I always draw through the shoulders. So they'll be a little wider. I know it looks like a mess, but you'll see. I like to have the, you know, the searching is part of the experience. And we'll just come down. And now, because it's pastel, what I like to do, since there's so much going on that gets very confusing, is I start actually with a background color in order to carve what I am seeing. And so I'm looking for color that will allow me to sort of contour. It's a little bit different than the way I'll do it in oils, because I want to see what the contour is. And work within that to an extent. Before I continue on that, I'm going to go starting in on color for her head, for her face first. And again, with pastel, I can go over things. So I'm squinting, just trying to find, and I'm putting my colors here when I'm done, trying to find a color and a value as I go down, and not in terms of doing, this is going to be maybe a 5 to 10 minute pose. So I'm not going to worry too much yet about overlaying color. Right now, it's just find a color and place it. And so I'm taking one color for the dark side of her skin, and now I'm finding a color for the lighter side, and I've got, here we go. And I'm thinking very much always in terms of the shapes that it makes. And a lot of the adjustments happen, I find, as I paint or as I put in my color, I make those adjustments because I don't always, sometimes the drawing is just where I want it to be. Clearly in this case, it was not. And because it's pastel, I can also hit it lighter. And so I'm thinking each area has a different color field. Yeah, that should work. Let's see. Maybe I'll keep this. No. I think I'll make it a lot brighter. Rather than picking up something light, I'm going to pick up an intense color like this red. For the light side. And then the dark side, I'll pick up, that's a little too purple, so I'm figuring out a good, that's not quite dark enough. Let's try this one. There we go. We'll try that for now. I can always come back in over it. But the idea when you're doing an actual painting in these sketches, again, is to figure out not just the exact color, but think in terms of the value first and the shapes. And it's all shapes being basically constantly pieced together to create our figure. And what I'll do is I'll put a color down and then I'll carve back with the background in order to make it the shape that I really want, if it's not that shape to begin with. Again, these are relatively quick poses. So I'm not thinking a lot yet about changing, anything nuanced. It's all big shapes, big areas of value, and actually, let's do it the other way. It's turned out to be darker. And this will be the lighter side. So that might be the first step in creating the shapes of what that figure is doing. It does, and because this is from here, I guess I will do this a little longer. From here, I'll show you how it can continue to evolve, both with color and with value. This is a little bit dark. So I'm coming in and it's not quite as warm as I want it to be. So I'm adding a little bit of this kind of orangey color over it. And I'm going to bring that light out a little further here. And I'm going to, let me carve a little back here in so that she has a little more shape there. But I would take this red that is my nice intense color for the light side and just lightly come over my dark, very, very lightly. You know, with the pastel, you have that opportunity to use the pressure and not just the color. And so that it warms it up a little bit and relates a little bit more to the color that we have. I changed, by the way, that skirt, obviously, because I thought, how much pink does any one picture have to have? Anyway, and this could continue to create my shapes more and more as I work it. So in other words, this arm, it's wrong. So we come in with my darker, and then my background is able to carve back on that arm and continue to make it more of what you want. So it's really a matter of piecing together all these different shapes and colors But it's important to get that movement first. Even if it wasn't, as you saw, I had to keep correcting it and correcting it to get it to where, to the size that I wanted. But that's okay because it's pastel, like oil. It doesn't, you can go over things. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to work that other way. You can do it this way. So I'm going to do another one now because this is about the equivalent of maybe a 5-minute. And one of the advantages and one of the reasons that I'd like to do these quicker and work up from, say, 5 to 10 or whatever is because you find yourself working with a lot more determination. Like you'll say, okay, I'm going to do this much for this one. And as you continue to add on to it, I think you learn by the decisions that you continue to make. So let's see, which is the next one? I think I'll do this one next. Oops, gotta get my tape. Now, obviously, she's not going to totally fit on my piece. So I will think again about the design. I don't mind covering that foot because I'm probably not going to get that far in this one anyway. Okay, so again, let's start. Let's see if this one is a little bit. I like working with this. Okay, so I want to think about how she's going to flow on the page as well. Because again, I'm working on smaller paper. I'm not going to fit all of her. But I like that because it allows you to have a little more sense of how you're going to design your piece. Now, because she's sitting down, we have a different aspect in terms of figuring out what her movement might be. Whereas the other was a standing pose, this becomes important to figure out where the center is, where her back goes here. And it's a foreshortening actually of her leg. And I might have something like that to begin with. And I like that as a beginning because it allows me to see where she's going to flow. But I do always want to place that head first. Everything is going to come off of in terms of dimensions, especially what that head is. And I don't really tend to measure it. Sometimes I'll say, okay, about halfway down is the waist and another half might be to the bottom of the feet. But I like to sort of figure, you know, I might exaggerate the legs to give her a bit more elegance, but I'm not really a measurer in that sense. And this one I think we'll take our time with a little more. And again, look at the angle on those shoulders. Now her neck will come down, but then you don't just draw one shoulder and the other. Let's draw right through. Let's see where that shoulder shows up about here. And we know that it's angled. So I draw right through because again, we can cover it up. And also that's really what the shoulders do. It's like a cage. I consider it like a hanger. If you have that, if you look at the way a hanger is and you consider that the top is the neck and then how does the rest of it go, you would draw straight through to figure out and to give it much more of a flow to the body. I might figure out where that elbow is going to be. It's going to go right off. And I'd see how high up does that hand go. And you can see in a way it's like, it's lines that give you the dimensions and the angles so that you're not just drawing from the top and hoping it all works out. You're figuring out, in a sense, what the armature is first. The same way you might do an architectural drawing. You would have ideas of where the rooms would go. You wouldn't start with one room in particular. And we'll say that's where that hand goes. And this might be a little bit further out. And again, now, so I've readjusted it. So this has to be a little bit longer, but it's still on that same angles. When it's a foreshortened leg, what I like to do is say, you know, how I sort of draw around things as if I'm doing the anatomy as I'm drawing. And I know that this is where the thigh will be. And then I literally place the knee in front so that it's the right size, hopefully. I'm looking at this a little at an angle. And I'm not going to get into too much detail on that. And we know that this is going to just go right off the page. And that's her chair. Okay, now that might be my first study of what I'm doing. And now I can go into some of the detail from here. But I don't, so I'm looking at basically the shadow shapes. And because it's a relatively quick demo, I'm not sure I'm going to get that much into the features on this one, but I do want to get that side of the face because of the plane change from the front to the front. Maybe we'll get a little bottom here at the nose. And then I'm sort of letting these now come together a little more because I have my guide. So now I'll find that shoulder. And that becomes an important clue as well, is the angle of the top of her shirt and how things will wrap around. So this is the front part. This creates the side of her body. Oops, and my arm, I have to redo that because now I didn't give enough arm space. Get that out a little more. It's not an exact science. And you shouldn't be afraid to hunt and peck your way through it a little bit so that you can create it. Now I probably have enough here to start in on the color. And that's the other thing I like. Don't want to spend, you know, these are quick sketches. So whereas if I was doing anything a lot longer, I might get into her features and stuff, but this is a quick sketch. So I'm just trying to create for you how those first steps go. Like the 5-minute, that was the first step. Now here's the first steps of how this would then continue to be creative. And again, I like to start with creating the background to carve it, which is something I don't necessarily do as much in the oils, but I like to do that in the pastel because it really lets me separate out where she is on this page. I also like to create these negative spaces just for the design purposes. And I keep my background, I don't like halos. I like to keep my background very, very straight, you know, straight lines, not anything like that, because as soon as you do stuff like that, you begin to create another shape to look at, and we want to look at this shape. So now I have a lot of colors here already. So let's just start in on the colors on the light part of her face. And again, I'm not really thinking too much about the features on this cake right now. And this is all the light part, which is just that first layer. Don't forget, this is just what's the first layer you put down, because with pastels, we always have to sort of overlay to get more colors. And, you know, for a sketch, I may not do more on the hand than that, just enough to show that it's the hand and what it's doing. And again, I play a lot with the pressure with pastel. You know, when if I press down harder, it pops forward a little bit. You can see that in the hand. If I don't put as much pressure, then it's a little bit darker and I don't have to necessarily always go to another color. I think I like this color better. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to show you how this can also change in terms of its light, coolness. But for now, actually it does have to be darker. I'm just putting in that shadow, and I'm following the shape I see of her cheekbone and down the side of her face. And I'm going to get a nice dark for the hair, because that plays off nicely. Just leave that for now. And we might as well stay with those same colors on the shirt that we created, because I don't feel like necessarily picking up another, but the lighting is different in this. So the side here actually becomes lighter, and in front, it's more in shadow. Now I'm pressing, this is dark, and I had some dark underneath here, so I'm not pressing super hard to get, to do this side here, because I want it to be even a little darker. And here where it's a little bit of light coming, just a touch, but not too much. Mostly it's dark. Again, I don't go to any nuance yet. I always want to work the whole at the same time. So where my lights come in or where my colors change, I do that now. I don't change each piece. I want to relate, so I'm kind of placing them very similar to what we already did with the line. Now we're doing with color. We're just doing shape and color. We're not, and if they don't totally relate yet, that's okay. And I realize too that this has to come down. I see much better in shapes than I do in lines. So when I start to put the shapes in, that's when I see where that leg really has to go. A little bit of the foot. And this would be sort of like stage 2. Let's get a color for that chair. Chair to be. The hunt and peck of pastels that I'm sure you all know. There we go. That's pretty good. And I have a little bit of the no. Okay, so now I'm going to go back, and now is the time when I start to say what do I want to develop and what might actually just be left undeveloped. Partly because, as you all know, a lot of times when you're doing figure drawing, it's you know, it's timed, so you don't always have the ability to change it. But also, I like that it's timed because it makes me think what's important, what do I want to have really work, and what do I not care about as much. And I'm always very drawn to what happens in the faces. So now I will go back and say, well, maybe I will get a little more involved, because I don't want to do that too soon. I want to know where my design is. I want to know where my figure's going. I want to put in the important colors and value relationships. And then I want to say, okay, I've worked the whole, I have the design, so what do I want to do now? And I think what I'd like to do is get her a little bit more developed. And as I do that, I think I have to trim her a little bit in here. And again, it's not a very big face, so it's not a portrait, that's for sure. But as I create the face, I can start to pull in areas that need to be, might have been not quite what I wanted. And I have, mostly I use a lot of Terry Ludwig, but I also sometimes will use some of the new pastels if I want something a little bit harder. I like the Terry Ludwig because there is an edge to it. Even on a small piece like this, I can get a little bit of color going. And I'm going to keep making adjustments and warming and cooling things down. I want this to be a little bit warmer in here and down in here, but I like that shadow that gets created from the bottom of the chin to the top of the neck. I want to change that color a little bit. Also, I do use the compressed charcoal sometimes for detail. I want to cool it down a little bit, in part to because I see that, but also I want to be able to have it relate a little bit more in here. So I'm looking for a bluer color that is similar in value to the color that I already have down there in warmth. See, nope, that's a little too dark. Let's try this one. Yeah, there we go. So I'm putting a little bit of that cool in there and going back in and recreating a bit of the chin and under the chin. But I like the coolness that just starts to come out a little bit. It lets things relate pretty nicely to everything else. Carve a little more on this arm. And we've got a nice highlight on that arm. So I'm going to work with that too. But now I still want to let these be just a little more defined. I'm not going to work that much more on this one either, because I want to do one more for you at least. And it's a little too light, so I'm going to soften it. And a little bit of light here, maybe. And because I put some cool there, I think I want a little bit of cool coming in down here as well in her arm. Combination of the warm and cool for the shadow that happens down in here. And the only other thing I might want to do before I go on to another one is maybe make this a little bit lighter. Oops. Well, there was one I was going to do, and I see that I guess I didn't print it out. I thought I had. Okay. All righty. I think I'll do one more, hopefully. I had one in mind, but I don't see it. Huh. Well, let's try this little girl then. See what happens. I'm staying with the same background color for now, which is, I work on the Art Spectrum Color Fix paper. And the color I've been using is raw sienna. I like the raw sienna. I like the terracotta as well. But because I'm choosing out these colors and working relatively quickly, I'm keeping the same color scheme so some of these colors can continue to work. And let's try this little girl here. And she's going to be a little harder because she's straight up and down. So too bad. I'm going to do it anyway. She's also got very different dimensions because it's a little girl. So let's hope she looks like a little girl, not a little old lady. Her shoulders still get drawn through. We shall see. Well, I always say take chances when you always take chances. And I always say if I can take chances in a demo, you guys can take chances on your work. Really, really skinny. So you can see that as I create her, I'm thinking not one leg and another leg, but the whole contour essentially of what her body's doing. And she's quite straight up and down. So a little bit, I'm not happy with her at all. Took this photo of this little girl because she looked so much like I did when I was that age. Fix a lot of this with color. And I'm looking at what goes on in between the legs as their negative spaces will help to create that slightly knock-kneed look she has. Okay, I'm again going to start, I think I'll choose a different background this time. And again, I do a lot of my carving on that background first to fix things that need fixing. It's, you know, let me say this now, that painting, whether it be in oil painting or whether it be in pastel, it's not as much about drawing as it is about shapes. It's not that drawing skills are not necessary. It's just not thinking in terms of line, but thinking in terms of shapes, which is why I do it this way, which is why I'll put down a beginning, but then I'm much more comfortable carving it as shapes than I would be continuing to do it in line, especially if, because part of that also what will happen is you'll be coloring in rather than thinking of the whole shape. So let's just keep moving around on this and see what happens with shapes. So I've got and again, one color, one shape, one value is what I'm looking to continuously do rather than get involved in too much detail. Here, it's all in my face. There we go. Now, in a child, they have much less neck and much more, and they're much narrower, obviously, in her case. So I have to make sure I don't have too much neck. Little ways that you kind of learn to describe some of the age. Hopefully this will work. Okay. I'm going to go right in here before I continue down from her shoulder. and then carve back. Again, I made it lighter on top, but it's the same color. That side to be a little darker. That dark. This is better dark. I didn't want it to get, see, this would have been too dark for that side. So I came with this color, which is darker, but not quite as dark, because again, they have to relate. I can't go from something that is very, very light to something that becomes very, very dark, because in so doing, you're going to separate rather than feel like it's all one shape. It's going to start to become like a yin yang almost, you know, like they don't relate to each other at all. When you work your values, you have to make sure that that you don't skip from like a 1, which would be very, very light, to a 10, which would be very, very dark. And I'm gonna get a cute little suit on her, but a different color, because otherwise she's too much the same color. So let's give her loose, not a blue suit, a green suit. Give her whatever color we want. And again, this is going to end up being a little bit longer. As we move down, and I'm looking for something that will make that be darker, different ways to do that. Yeah, let's try this. Nope. I'm looking for something that will be darker, but relate somehow. No, that's pretty good. That doesn't sort of work. It's always, you can always change it eventually with different color overlays, but I try at least in the beginning to have them be somewhat related. And I press down harder where I see the light, like over here on this little area that comes out up there. And now very, very lightly I'm touching for 2 reasons. Yeah, there is light on the leg, but also it's further down, so I don't want it to compete and be quite as light as where the top of the light is that's really hitting her. So I'm taking the same color that I used, but I'm using it very lightly. That's too bright. So the ways in which you show light on something can be in value. You know, we can pick up a white or a lighter value pastel, but it can also be in terms of brightness. So so sometimes you can just by, like the red was a good example on the other, that the brightness of the red is what showed how light something was, rather than coming in with a lighter value. So let's continue. Now, if I cared about the whole scene, I would eventually make that look more like the water, but it's not about that. It's just about the figure. And I'll show you something about the hands in a minute. And her little knock-knee isn't knock-kneed anymore, so let's get it more knock-kneed because that's so cute. Now, on the hand, again, with just the one color or the one value and color, by pressing harder in certain areas, I can pull out the planes a little bit, like in here, or the knuckle in that case, and the little hand that comes out. And I'm not worried too much about completing it right now. I just want it to sit out here. Okay, now I like what's happened up there, but I want to now make another color to bring out some of the light a little differently. So I want to go with something maybe a little lighter up there, but maybe also, but not white, because that will be too light. Let's see what happens. Now I'm very lightly touching, because now in a sense I'm sort of glazing over to create more colors. And I like that top being a little bit lighter. And I never work, it's not this kind of a thing. I don't hold my medium that way, and I don't hold my pastels either that way. I always cup them. That's what I like about the Terry Lidwig. There's an ability to use the side of the medium when you want to get a full shape rather than just a line. Now, because I've got a lot of light, a lot of warmth, I'd also want to add, again, do a little bit of cool over the warm in order to bring some more color harmony. Same thing, I can put some warm over the dark, over the cool if I want, or if I want it to just stay really dynamic, I might just leave it. Once you do cools and warms, you kind of gray things down a bit. Let's see. It's not too bad. I like that color. It's sort of a non-color greenish color. And I think that this arm should be a little bit darker in the shadow area. So I will look for a warm that's a little darker. I'm sure you all know as pastelists, the constant hunt and peck for the color you want. No, I don't want that color. I'm sitting here with sort of two sets going, or not two sets, but two boxes going. And again, I'm pulling out with the light a little bit of that fun little elbow. It's kind of bony. So what you can see too is how with more, oh, it's too bony, how you can start to add detail as you continue rather than from the very beginning. So let's see. And I'm doing a little warm on cool, or excuse me, cool on warm. Not too much more. So this is where you would put more detail, although she's not very, I didn't make her that big, so I don't want to put too much detail. But it's definitely every time, whether it's paint, whether it's pastel, it is a transition from very big, simple shapes to detail. It's not detail in the beginning. If you do detail in the beginning, usually you end up wanting to get rid of something that you put in because it's not quite right. And I think I'm going to be finishing up on her, and we have time for another one. I have done, I'm so disappointed. I had this one I was going to do, but I don't think I remembered to print it out. And I want to get this a little bit lighter, a little brighter. These little things that hang out. Who knows what they are? And I'm going to warm that up just a teeny bit, because so it's not quite so different from everything else. And I'm keeping the legs very unfinished because I want the attention up there. And of course, if we were doing that. Okay, I'll finish this one up a little bit more. This is probably, rather than a Terry Ludwig, probably either a Unison or a Schminke. Those are kind of what I like to use in terms of pastels. Mostly though, if I order pastels, they tend to be, new ones that I get are usually just the Terry Ludwig. Probably should have left the hand. I'll just do that. Okay. I guess, let me just see what we'll do for the last one. Yeah, if we do that, I think it's going to get too complicated. So why don't we try her? I hope what I'm saying is clear and not confusing, because the takeaways that I really want you to get from this is process. I think process is, at this point, the most important thing that I'm trying to stress, which is why I'm doing these as quick, 5-10 minute rather than long ones, because the beginning process is what will take you through to a longer pose as well. If I were doing this in 20 minutes, the only thing, or more, the only difference might be that I take a little more time with it than I'm taking on these quicker ones, but the idea will be the same. Now I'm squinting down because I want to see all of that as one dark shape. But again, I want to start, oops, I better put more tape on. I want to start with the head being the most important. There are people who add the head on at the end of a figure. I never do that. I always have to at least know where the head is and what its size would be. Even if you cut it completely off, I would then draw imaginarily up here until I got down there. That's how I would figure out my proportions. Now, clearly she's going that way, so I've already made a mistake letting that head go too far over. So let's start. Now remember I said with the hat, it's not where the brim is, it's where the hat actually fits on the head. So even though I don't see that other brim, I draw it. I say that's up there, and I have to locate where that other part of the head would be. It's never an arbitrary, I don't trust it to just maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. I have to figure out where things are. Now she's got the very high shoulders here. So I would give that guide first, but before I would go to what her arm is doing, that all depends on also where her body lies. The core of the body is the most important. Even if she's sitting down or whatever, you want to get the angles correct. Everything, a hand can be lower, higher, a foot has to be where it's placed because it's going to determine what, or the foot with the, I should say where the weight is going to determine how that body goes. So once again, I just kind of know, it doesn't matter whether I even finish it. I just have to know what her flow is before I continue. And then I can say, okay, it's going to be in shadow. And sometimes I don't measure this way, like, oh, this is an inch, this is an inch, but I do plumb lines. I say, where does this would be a horizontal plumb line. And I see where her far shoulder is really way up here. Okay. And where is the other shoulder? A little bit lower over here. But I will figure out, because especially when it's awkward like that, say what does it go to in relationship to the head? What does the top of the shoulder go to in relationship to the head? For me, everything becomes in relationship to where the head is. And again, we might make that too low. So where does the hand go? It's quite high. So in essence, I have an imaginary grid that is always happening so I can figure out where things go. And there's always, you can see it, it's harder to see on here, but there will be a little more shadow on the side because there are planes. There's the front plane and the side plane. And she's got a little bit of a twist going. So you see a little bit of that hip and where the towel comes down. And now I see that I need to make this a little bit longer. It doesn't change the flow. It just means I have to go a little further down than I thought I was going to have to go. And again, where does that hand then go? Okay, and that again, starting once again, that's my grid. Now the difference is that this is has a lot more shadow. I really like when there's a lot of shadow. And oops, again, let's get some background going first. I'm just much more comfortable when I have that background. Look at that color. Nah, I really like this color on the, that's why I always choose it. It looks so nice against the raw sienna. Yeah. Carve in a little bit on her head there, just a bit. And then I like that hat, I want it to be a little bit brighter and lighter up here. Don't see much of it, but you do see a little. And the thing is, everybody would design this to their own liking and how they would want to, you know, some people might have a totally different design going, which is good. Now, I squint a lot, and I'm squinting down to see all of this as just one dark shape. You can always go back in on it and create more, more depth or what have you in terms of the color. But for the beginning, it's not necessary to do that. It's just necessary to see it in its simplest form. Now see, now that I did that, I realize that this comes in a little bit more on her shoulder. Again, I just see better in shapes than I do in line. And I see better in color than I do in black and white. Now that's going to be, because I think I'm going to switch to this color because even though it is very, very high, you know, lighting, I still don't want it to be such a contrast that it won't relate. So I'm going to drag this orange I just picked up a little bit over that, just to lighten it just enough so it all starts to relate a little better. Yeah, but I think I want this to be a little lighter. And one thing I learned a long time ago was one of the most valuable things I learned in art school when I went back to art school and actually got an education in art, is that shadow shapes are what are going to give you shadow shapes and their edges. That's what's going to show you how things go. If, you know, it's not a rounding out of things, it's a shadow shape, one against the other. And it took me a very long time to see shadow shapes. I wasn't very good at it. It was a revelation when I finally did. And once you see start to really see shadow shapes, you see them forever. So once again, this is where the light kind of is, and this is the side of her, so I'm making it darker. Unify it a little bit. Now again, I press down harder with this light value. It's lighter than the page, so it fills in more, so it's lighter. And then for the part that is maybe not quite as light, I just don't press down as hard. For an ochre color. Now I have one. That's on the other side for that shadow. And because the bench becomes kind of important, well, that in as well. Again, lighter where the light hit it, not pressing quite as hard the rest of the way. And I know there's a towel there, but we're just going to make it the bench. She's sitting in a corner, so this goes this way. Okay. Now I could leave that, or I could develop it. What's our time? We have another 5 minutes. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let some of that hat go into, right now I have a value for the bottom of the brim and I have a value for the face, but I want to lose that edge a little bit for the sake of enforcing that shadow. So I've got a nice ochre now, and I'm just going to come in over some of that and pull it in onto the face as well. Let me just carry this through. Warm that up a little. And she has those sunglasses, and I might be able to show you a little bit about just a shade darker happening to show a little bit of the face. but I don't want to lose that feeling of most of this being in shadow. So I probably won't do that. I think instead I'm going to get this shape against her, again, of her shoulder a little bit more pronounced. Let's bring a little of that cool into that. I like that transition of putting a little bit of cool in there. Making this a little bit lighter. I have a feeling I am what they call petting the dog. It's probably not necessary to do too much more, but I like that color. This color better. So as I would then start overlaying more and more, that's when I would start getting some warms and cools so that they begin to relate. So not everything that's body would only be warm. Some of it might be cool as well, or at least have aspects of, whoop, just lost that. I don't like how that hand is very scary. Let's just carve back in on it, use it a little bit. Look here, just gonna leave that. It would take me too long to figure it out. Okay, I think that's about it. One thing I could do if I wanted to was just let that leg come down with a little shadow. But again, the important thing is this is where I focus. This is still a little too warm. So while I have a couple more minutes at most, I'm going to cool it down a little. I think the reason being is that although it was dark, because it was only the one color of that, very warm color, it was a little too intense. And so I wanted to, if I take a little bit of the cool color over it, that will push it. It has to be the right value, the same value, or close to it. Then it takes some of the intensity away and it will feel more like a shadow. Highlight there on her shoulder. Okay. Alrighty, I'm gonna take you guys over. If there are any questions, let me just wash my hands real quick so I don't get dust all over my computer. And I will be sending out, I will photo these all so you'll get the photos of what they look like. And for those of you who are new, there is a video that's made as well. And you will have access to that. You'll be sent a link in about a week so that you always have that. Okay. All righty. Let's see. If you have any questions.
I have a question, Aline.
Okay, which is it, Ginny or Deborah?
It's Deborah, but it'll be quick.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Do you ever use pastel paper such as Canson Métier?
I don't love Canson is great for, like, if you were taking a workshop and they were going to be like 2 minute, 5 minute, those kinds of then I think hands-on is great for that. It doesn't allow you, well, I should say it doesn't allow me to build color very well. I have seen people do beautiful things on hands-on, but for me, I really prefer the sanded surface to, because you can see that the way I work, it's not as much in line as it is in shape. And I like to really be able to get a shape down and then change it or come back in over it if necessary. So I prefer that. But I think I do have cans on paper, or I think I still do, for, you know, very short poses.
Oh, okay.
Just for me. Yeah.
Sure.
Ginny,
Okay.
do you have a question?
Thanks.
Sure.
I did. I just wanted to ask, do you always prefer that sienna color background?
I like that, and I like the terracotta. I chose to stay with only the sienna today, so because the colors were already, you know, out, and I knew how they would react. Each time you take a different color, you have to kind of rethink how your pastel is going to show up on it. So although I really like the terracotta as well, I like the darker ones, but I find that for figure, sienna is really nice because it's not too dark, so that when you put a light down, it doesn't totally pop off the page. Sometimes for landscapes, I really like the terracotta because things really pop from it, but you have to control that so that not the wrong things pop. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Rosie, you had a question?
Yes. What's your decision about putting the head basically off part of it off the top of the page?
Yeah.
and-
Yes, go ahead.
And what would you do if you were going to finish these more?
Well, some of them I might leave the way they are. I mean, I kind of enjoy an unfinished look. It's if I, you know, really, if I were going to do them more finished, I would probably start larger to begin with. That's one thing. On some of them, I think what I would do is just get more, I'm just looking at them. Let me get the last one. I think I would just do a little more overlapping of my warms and cools. You know, they're very basic right now. Get this last one. For instance, you can probably see this. Like in here, I might leave it, or I might want to get a little more color going so it's not just blue. Maybe I would put a little of the yellow and come up into here. I might, well, I'd certainly finish that claw at the end, but we're not going to do that right now. You know, and where you can see things starting to happen in here, that's the kind of thing, if I build color, I might do, but I still would probably leave a lot of it unfinished, because I like, for me, that's how I see the figure. You know, I think that's how everybody really sees life. You know, I've said this before, if you've seen it, but you know, if somebody's standing in front of you and you're making just eye contact and you let your peripheral vision complete, you will not be able to tell what shoes they're wearing, because we don't see everything equally. So when I do something like this, I like some of it to fade off and to really come in on what's of interest to me. And in full disclosure, I'm much happier doing the shorter ones, both in oils and in pastels. I've struggled with sometimes creating a figure on a canvas or a figure on a page. Sometimes it's too much time for me, and I don't always make the kinds of decisions that please me. And so, but it's something I'm working on to get better at having. I mean, I think I mentioned during one of the other figure things, take a look at someone like Terry Mura, and you can email me if you ever want to know any more about it. But there's some figurative painters whose work I absolutely love. And one of the things I love about his work is that he will do a full painting, but it has the energy of a sketch. You know, it just has that gorgeous feeling, and he really plays with shadow and light a lot. And I love that, and I really admire it. But I have yet to feel very happy with when I've done it. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, my other question was about putting the part of the head off the top of the page.
Yeah, again, I'm making quick decisions here, and I just really like that. I think I really wanted that close-up feeling, and then the feeling of it, you know, the rest of the figure coming down. It could have been, I could have made it perhaps lower, but I like playing with that. I don't always want to have the whole head, then you've got this funny little negative space above the hat, which doesn't always work that well. And then you might want more of the figure on the page, but you can't because you've started it too low. So it's, I like to play with that. I kind of look at these 9x12s, because that's the size it is, as little windows. And what you see when you look through a window, what's cropped and what isn't. And I like that about them. That's one of the advantages when I work smaller. I never try to put the whole figure on a 9x12 because, it'll be floating there in a funny way, and it'll just be too tiny. So I always think about that as design. But if I did this over, I might lower it. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I just want to say, it's Deborah, and I just want to say one more thing about the head off the page. What about the feet off the page? Well, I notice your feet are kind of, what about the feet?
Well, it's a focus. So if what interested me the most would be the feet, then I would have perhaps a lot of her off the page and focus on the feet. And that's something that might happen, if, say, it was a foreshortening and you were, someone's lying down, you're starting with their feet and they go off. It's not that I mind doing feet. I just I usually don't put them to the same attention, because I happen to really love the head and the arms, and that's usually the core of the body is what ends up interesting me. So that's usually what I go for. And in that case, I'm going to let the feet. In this case, I knew that the legs would go off the page. One thing I can say: never try to foot. If it doesn't fit, don't try to put those feet. Just because,
I know.
Because you're going to get a funny, it'll be disorienting in terms of.
So it's not a big deal if the feet aren't there all the time. Okay.
Not for me.
Okay.
If you're doing the whole figure, then of course you'd have the feet. But and that's why I say in these 9x12s, I wouldn't try to squeeze the whole figure onto that page.
I see. Okay.
Jenny,
Thanks.
did you have another question? I still see you unmuted, or.
Goes along with all of this. So I just joined a figure class, a figure once a week session. Would you start out using the great big newsprint and try and get the whole body in, or
are you doing this from in your studio, like a Zoom?
That's exactly what it is. It's the group out in New Orleans.
If it fit, God, I hope it's okay. If you have room to work on it, I usually, if I'm in a figure class, it's just this particular easel and everything isn't big enough. I would start with I like an 18x24 newsprint, and I like doing my sketches there. But I will say that if I want to work in color, I'll get to it right away. And often, I don't know if you took the painting one last week, but the painting one, I'll work on a toned background, this smooth paper for the quick ones, because I'm not just making decisions about the figure. I'm also making decisions about color and shape and value while I'm doing it. And I find that by work, obviously a 2-minute might be, you'd probably only get to do one thing. But if I was working in pastel, then charcoal is fine. But if I was working in paint, I would do my drawings with a brush, because it's all about preparing for the long, to feel comfortable as I do longer poses. I try to get some color on as soon as possible, even if you're on the newsprint, just to get that comfort level going with the pastel. And
okay, well, I'm doing the pastel now. I'll get to the paint one day.
okay.
I watched some of your oil painting demos, so I appreciate that you're doing both. Thank you.
Yeah, I like doing. They're fun. I don't see any hands raised or anybody else unmuted. So if there are no more questions, let me just.
I have one.
Yes.
I have one for Jenny.
Uh-huh.
I'm in right above New Orleans. Are you in New Orleans taking this class?
No, I'm not. It's Sandra Burchell has the class, and she's not even there at the moment. She's in Arizona or someplace. But once they have the Zoom thing set up,
right.
It's people from everywhere, and it's open to anybody on Thursdays.
How is she? But I'm curious how the models are. Because I know Rosie, the one that you were taking, that you sent me pictures of, seemed to be a lot more professional, or a lot easier to see the figure than the other ones that we were doing.
Yeah, well, he has a professional sculpture studio.
Yeah, that's like amazing when it's like that, because we also, there's a young woman whose mother is an amazing artist and an old friend of mine, and she's been doing these Zoom figure things, and they're a little hard to see because she's, like a home setup. But I just want to say that I am in the workshops. I think they're going to be doing this with an iPhone on a tripod. I think will be a lot easier to see the demo, and then of course they'll be a lot more interactive. But yeah, it's it's home. We're all struggling with our home Zooms and figuring out how to make them, work as well as possible.
I think it's pretty much set up. I'm sorry, Aileen, I didn't mean.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say they have different models that they have used over the years, and the models actually they go and set it up for them, and then the models set up their own cameras and stuff in their homes.
Yeah, well, that's what she does too. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think that, yeah, I we're stuck on Zoom and we're lucky to have it. That's the way I look at it. Nothing can replace one-on-one and being with a class. I miss it more than you can know. But I'm really grateful for Zoom because it allows us to at least keep interacting and working and doing the art.
And it gives someone, I live in rural Ohio, so I don't.
And you can go anywhere for that.
No, I don't have the opportunity for a figure class at all. I'm far from cities. So.
Right. No, I mean, you can Zoom from anywhere, which is so cool. Because then you can do these online classes that normally maybe you wouldn't be able to do. So.
Silver lining for me.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Well, Zoom is a silver lining, I think, for all of us, because imagine this happening before all of this technology. Any other questions? If you have any questions you think of later, don't hesitate to email me. And thank you for joining me. It's been a lot of fun. I'm not going to be doing demos for a bit. I'm going to be doing workshops, but you never know. I may go back to demos. And if I do, I'll let everybody know. And thank you so much.